A lot of new faces here tonight. Some of you are familiar and have been to previous town halls, and we appreciate you traveling to this one as well. So as folks take their seats, I'm going to try to organize the microphone so I can see my remarks and you can hear me. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Smale, and I would like to welcome all of you to the third town hall on the modernization of the Columbia River Treaty regime. I want to thank Jennifer Anders, who couldn't be here with us tonight, but her team at the Northwest Power and Conservation Council for co-hosting this town hall. The council plays a unique and important role in the Pacific Northwest, and the State Department is pleased to partner with them to allow all of us to be here together this evening. I lead the negotiating team, serving as the chief U.S. negotiator for the Columbia River Treaty at the Department of State. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I work in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs in the Office of Canadian Affairs. We have committed to regular public engagements to update people on our progress, answer questions, and hear your perspectives on these important issues. Over the past year, we've held similar events in Spokane, Washington, Portland, Oregon, and now we're here in Kalispell. So we're moving around. I think I found the sweet spot finally for the microphone. These interactions are extremely valuable for the negotiating team and me. As you can imagine, it's always a pleasure to visit the beautiful and dynamic Pacific Northwest. And I'm especially happy to be here in Big Sky country. It is just stunning, and I'm happy that you all saved some snow for me in March. Future electricity, good. Before we get started, I want to share plans for upcoming town halls, our agenda for tonight's meeting, and to tell you how you can stay in touch with us. We've been holding these town halls as negotiations progress, rotating locations throughout the basin. So I don't have additional town halls to announce tonight, but I want you to know that you can stay tuned for updates on when and where the next one will take place by our State Department website. We put out a Federal Register notice as we did this, and also if you sign up for our email address, which I'll mention later on. And so those are rotating throughout the basin, but our priority is the negotiations, and so that's why we don't set a schedule of town halls, because as the negotiations progress, we schedule the town halls around the negotiations. And that's a question that actually we get in our inbox quite a bit, like what's the schedule for the town halls? And we don't know yet. We plan the next one as negotiations progress. So for those of you, we're still developing our plans, but we expect the next one will take place this summer sometime. So stay tuned for that. And for those of you who have attended previous town halls, this format and some of my remarks will be familiar, but it is what you have to say and giving your perspectives is what's going to make this town hall unique and what makes it important to the negotiations team. So tonight I'll share with you where we are in the negotiating process, and then open the floor to all of you for your comments and questions. And feel free to use our email address. It's columbiarivertreaty@state.gov to send us any comments or ask questions too. We may not be able to answer each question, but we do read each and every message, and we consider those views as we proceed with negotiations. So we're committed to providing you, the U.S. Columbia River Basin community, with regular updates and as much information as we can throughout the negotiations. I also want to take a moment to let you all know that we do have folks joining us to listen in by phone. We know it isn't always possible for everyone to join us in person, so we wanted to make sure we had a call-in option. But I do want to note that I appreciate all of you who have spent hours driving here to be at this town hall. And if I forget to say it at the end, my thoughts are with you all for a safe drive home tonight. So let's get started with what you came here for. Some of you may be wondering why the Department of State is involved in this treaty. As a lead foreign affairs agency for the U.S. government, the Department of State has a responsibility regarding negotiating and concluding international agreements and treaties on issues ranging from civil aviation to transboundary waters. In addition to the Department of State, there are 4 other agencies on the U.S. negotiating team: Bonneville Power Administration, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Northwestern Division, the Department of Interior, and our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. For short today, you'll hear me refer to them the common way we say them: the State Department. Lori's from Reclamation, so I'll say Reclamation, the Corps, BPA, and NOAA. So I'll let these folks all introduce themselves because we hope to all be interacting with you, and they're some of the greatest substantive experts you could hope for who are on the treaty negotiating team. They're all very good, so I'll let them introduce themselves. Kieran, why don't you start?
Thanks, Jill. I'm Kieran Connolly. I'm the Vice President of Generation Asset Management at the Bonneville Power Administration. Thank you for having me here today.
Good evening. My name is Michael Tehan. I'm the Assistant Regional Administrator for the Columbia Basin Office with NOAA Fisheries.
Good evening. It's great to be in Montana with you. My name is Lori Gray. I'm the Regional Director for the Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm located in Boise, Idaho.
And I'm Dave Paganis. I'm the Programs Director for the Northwestern Division, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, this works a lot better. So often when you hear people talk about the treaty, you hear them talk about the U.S. entity. So that's it's the Bonneville Power Administrator, which is not Kieran, but it's Kieran's boss, and it's the Corps' Northwestern Division Engineer, which is Dave's boss. And so they comprise the U.S. entity that people often discuss in relation to the treaty. In addition to representatives from the Corps and BPA, the negotiating team includes other members who also, as Lori mentioned, live and work in the Pacific Northwest. While I live and work in D.C., Lori, as she said, lives in Boise, and Dave, Kieran, and Michael all live and work in the Portland area. And so another issue we've had come up in the inbox is why are we letting D.C. negotiate this treaty, Washington, D.C.? And there's a lot of a lot of people who are negotiating the treaty live and work here in the region and have ongoing relationships with the tribes, state governments, local governments, and a broad spectrum of stakeholders. Many of them also played key roles throughout the regional recommendation. I'm looking at Dave in particular. He was process and understand the need to support the consensus developed through that effort. This is a very exciting time to be working on the treaty. People here in the Northwest have anticipated and planned this for many years. At the State Department, we're eager to move forward to help define how Americans and Canadians, including the tribes in the United States and the First Nations in Canada, will continue to mutually benefit from the treaty. But before we talk about what's happening with the treaty today, I wanted to take a look back at what led up to the treaty. Some of this will be a review for many in the room, but I think it's important to set the stage because, as I said, we have a lot of new faces here, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. We began working with Canada to cooperate on the development of the Columbia River in the 1940s. The 1948 flood, commonly known as the Vanport flood because of the destruction and loss of life that occurred in the community of Vanport, Oregon, caused major flooding throughout the Columbia River Basin, including northwest Montana. Other floods in the 1950s, like the 1954 and 1956 floods, which caused widespread flooding in the Kootenai Valley, reinforced the importance of accelerating cooperation with Canada. The U.S. government saw an urgent need to address flooding and address the risk to life and property as the region developed. Through the Columbia River Treaty, we sought to develop our shared resources in a way that would contribute to economic progress and the general welfare of people in both countries. We agreed that we could get the greatest benefit by cooperating with Canada on flood risk management and hydroelectric power generation, which would make other benefits possible as well. The treaty and the cooperation between the two countries included the ability to construct Libby Dam and the transboundary reservoir that it creates. Libby Dam continues to provide considerable benefits to the United States, Canada, and the region, and serves a critical role in both countries. We reached agreement in 1961, and in 1964, the treaty came into force. The treaty, which is now 55 years old, is an extremely important agreement with one of our best allies and partners in the hemisphere. We deeply value our unique and essential relationship with Canada. And around the world, this treaty serves as a model for transboundary water cooperation. Americans and Canadians alike should be proud of the invaluable cooperation that has contributed to the development of the regional economy on both sides of the border. Today, the treaty's flood risk management and hydropower operations have provided substantial benefits to millions of people in the United States and in Canada. Flow augmentation from the treaty reservoirs improves conditions for outmigrating juvenile salmon and steelhead in the Columbia River, including Chinook and sockeye salmon from transboundary Okanagan River. Adult salmon from the Columbia Basin not only contribute to ecosystem functions in the river and ocean, they support cultural and economic benefits shared by both countries from commercial, sport, and tribal fisheries, such as Chinook salmon caught in the waters of northern British Columbia and the west coast of Vancouver Island. While the U.S. Columbia River operations facilitate additional benefits throughout the Columbia River system, the treaty itself and our discussions with Canada are focused on water flowing across the border. Namely, from Canadian treaty projects, Keenly Side, also known as Arrow, Duncan and Micah dams, and from Libby Dam in the United States, which I had the pleasure of visiting earlier this summer with my colleagues and with our Canadian counterparts. These projects, or last summer more accurately, these projects together are collectively known as the treaty projects. Since Libby Dam is the only treaty project in the United States, we wanted to come to Northwest Montana to hear from you about your perspectives on the treaty and Libby Dam. So why modernize? For the United States, we think that the treaty regime has been tremendously successful. At the same time, after 55 years of experience, we see areas where we think things can be improved. I want to pause here for a moment and explain why we use the word regime in this context. When we say the Columbia River Treaty regime, we mean the 1961 treaty itself, the 1964 treaty protocol, and associated implementing arrangements for the treaty that have been developed over the past 55 years. In other words, it's how we make the text of the treaty a reality. Over the years, Treaty implementation has been shaped by notes exchanged between our two governments and through numerous operational and supplemental arrangements between the United States and Canadian implementing entities. This includes agreements for shaping flow to meet ecosystem objectives in both countries. So when we talk about modernizing the Columbia River Treaty regime, this includes a focus on updating how we implement the treaty. So in terms of U.S. negotiating objectives, as we work on modernizing the Columbia River Treaty regime, our objectives include continued careful management of flood risk, ensuring a reliable and economical power supply, and improving ecosystem benefits. So let me explain each of those in a little more detail. On flood risk management, the Northwest is a pillar of the U.S. economy, and millions of people depend on flood risk management to protect their lives, property, and businesses. We paid up front for flood control and storage in Canada through 2024, but after that, the treaty's flood control provisions changed to a less defined approach in terms of operations and payment to Canada for its role in managing flows across the border. Both governments should determine together how we will address post-2024 changes in the treaty and continue managing flood risk. On hydropower, we will seek an equitable distribution of power benefits between the two countries. The Northwest energy market has transformed dramatically since the 1960s, and technology has evolved. The Northwest is much more energy efficient than once predicted, and it has experienced lower than expected regional load growth. As we have this conversation with Canada, we will take these and other changes into account in looking at the downstream power benefits achieved through coordination. And on the ecosystem, we will also seek opportunities to improve ecosystem cooperation for the benefit of fish and wildlife in both countries in a manner that appropriately balances this with other benefits. We believe both countries have a shared interest in a sustainable ecosystem. Tangible ecosystem benefits in the Kootenai and Flathead basins are the result of the dedication and collaborative efforts of the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho, the Ktunaxa Nation Council, Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, Province of BC, the states of Idaho and Montana, and representatives from the U.S. and Canadian governments. For example, Libby Dam operations, in conjunction with habitat enhancements, have been designed to help improve the status of Endangered Species Act listed Kootenai River white sturgeon and bull trout, while also benefiting other fish species that are important to local residents in the region. By improving conditions for out-migrating juvenile salmon and steelhead and providing other ecosystem benefits, flow augmentation from the treaty reservoirs supports economic and cultural benefits from enhanced fisheries that both countries share. We also need to determine with Canada, looking ahead, how we might build in flexibility to adapt to changes based on new information, technology, or changes in snow and rainfall patterns. It will be challenging to define how we plan for these future unknowns, but we want to work through these issues together. So, how did we develop the U.S. objectives? The U.S. negotiating team set these objectives with input from the people most directly affected in the United States by the treaty through the regional recommendation. For those who might not be familiar with the regional recommendation, it was submitted by the U.S. entity to the State Department in December 2013. Its full name is the U.S. entity's Regional Recommendation for the Future of the Columbia River Treaty after 2024. As many of you well know, this took years of collaboration and consultations with federal agencies in the region's states and tribes and extensive stakeholder engagement. I want to express our appreciation to those of you here today who supported the development of the regional recommendation. We are grateful to the tribes, states, federal agencies, and stakeholders for contributing to the consensus it outlines. We know that it required extensive engagement, hard work, and compromise. The regional recommendation concluded it is in the best interest of the United States to modernize the treaty regime so our legacy of mutual benefits with Canada will continue into the future. So what's happened this year? The United States and Canada have held 5 rounds of negotiations so far, the most recent February 27 and 28 in Washington, D.C., and we plan to continue to meet on a regular basis to make progress. As some of you may know, we will meet April 10 and 11 in Victoria, British Columbia. Between the first and second rounds, we visited the treaty projects, which I mentioned included our visit to Libby Dam in June, I believe it was. While I can't get into the specifics of the meetings, I can say that our conversations have been frank and productive. We are working together to modernize the treaty regime in a way that benefits both countries. We also continue to meet regularly with the U.S. Columbia Basin tribes, and in fact, we met with them yesterday in Paulson, and we met with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe earlier this morning and had a very productive meeting. We value the tribe's expertise and experience and are working to have meaningful engagement throughout the negotiations. We have also met with stakeholders, businesses, congressional and state representatives, and others with expertise and experience to hear their views on the treaty. And we have received questions and comments from the public through our Columbia River Treaty at state.gov email account. Before I wrap up, I want to underscore that we are looking ahead to how this treaty can be mutually beneficial in the future and faithful to the desires of people who live here in the basin. I'm confident that we will find common ground as we lay out our respective positions and turn them into a shared vision for the future of the basin. We know there are many entities and individuals throughout the Pacific Northwest with significant interests in the outcome of the negotiations with Canada. We are working to balance the region's myriad interests appropriately and come to agreement in a timely manner. As negotiations move forward, your patience and support to allow us to focus on the work at hand is critical. The United States and Canada have a long positive history of engagement on the Columbia River, and one goal is to make sure that we continue this global model of cooperation for many years to come. So thank you again for being here, and I look forward to hearing from you. And so that we can hear from as many people as possible, I'd ask that you please keep your remarks to 3 minutes. So now I'd like to open up the floor for questions and comments. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Columbia River Treaty members, and negotiators, I would like to read a letter from Senator Scott Sells, President of the Montana Senate. For over 50 years, our shared partnership has managed, utilized, and protected the resources of the Columbia River Basin. As you work to modernize this agreement, I urge you to amend the treaty to compensate the state of Montana for lost tax revenue due to the construction of Libby Dam. Lincoln County has lost millions of dollars in property taxes and lost revenues due to the many thousands of acres of county land that are now underneath Lake Koocanusa. Currently, British Columbia and the Canadian government are compensated for similar lost revenues, and we are simply asking that the treaty be made equal. Recently, our Senate voted 50-0 to endorse this alteration to the treaty. We believe wholeheartedly that we must equally share the economic benefits of this treaty as well as its burdens. We look forward to working with you and the other treaty stakeholders to modernize the agreement so we can move into the 21st century with a strong partnership. Sincerely, Scott Sales, President of the Senate. Would you like me to leave a copy of this with you?
Yes.
Okay.
I would.
And just a short note.
Oh, Michael said she'll take it.
Short note for myself that I wrote out. Since 1964, the members of the Columbia River Treaty have worked together to promote and protect Columbia River Basin. Together, we have strengthened our energy production, managed flood risk, and supported our tourism industry. It's been a productive and beneficial partnership. As you look for ways to modernize the treaty, I hope that you will work to improve its fiscal fairness. As a member of the Montana State Senate, I was proud to support a joint resolution asking you to compensate Lincoln County and the state of Montana for lost property taxes on the land of Lake Koocanusa. Libby Dam is an important part of the treaty, but we must recognize the negative impacts that it has created for Montanans. We welcome you to Montana and are grateful for your time and effort to modernize the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening to the members of the Columbia River Treaty and negotiators. My name is Brad Cheat. I have the honor of serving as the Majority Leader in the Montana House of Representatives. I bring to you a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Greg Kurtz. Welcome to Kalispell. We are grateful that you have chosen to have this important meeting in Big Sky Country. After 50 years of cooperation, we welcome your efforts to modernize the Columbia River Basin Treaty. Properly utilizing and protecting this watershed is of vital importance to our economy, energy, and environmental futures. As you negotiate the future of the treaty, we ask you to consider a joint resolution that recently passed the Montana State Legislature. The Libby Dam and Lake Koocanusa are critical to the health and productivity of the treaty. However, recouping Lincoln County's lost property tax revenues as a result of the Libby Dam is essential to the fairness of this treaty. The legislature overwhelmingly passed a bipartisan resolution asking that Montana be compensated in the same way that our Canadian partners are compensated for lost property tax revenues. We support the modernization and continuation of the Columbia River Basin Treaty. We look forward to growing our partnership and improving the treaty so that we can enjoy another half century of cooperation. Members, thank you.
Members, my name is Representative Mark Nolan, representing the great area of Big Fork. This discussion is important to the Montana State legislation, and that is why 12 of us legislators risked our lives getting here riding with Representative Glenn.
Thank you for risking your lives.
As a member of the House Natural Resource Committee, we watch the work that you do with great interest, and we would like to thank you for all your valuable work. I would like to express my concern of the potential threat of aquatic invasive species, or AIS, that we Montanans take with the utmost seriousness. As a legislator of our beautiful state, we implore you to consider all remedies to help us prevent this most serious concern. Our state, with limited funding resources, is reaching out to you for aid when you consider these and all other important issues. I have a letter from the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee that I'd like to present as well from Chairman White.
Thanks.
Madam Chief, members of the panel, for the record, I'm Senator Albert Olszewski. That's Senate District 6. Actually, the main geographic item in my district is Flathead Lake. So when people say I'm SOL, I'm the senator of the lake. Also today, I speak on behalf of Senator Dee Brown, who is the senator for Hungry Horse Reservoir, and my comments also include Bob Keenan, also Flathead Lake, and Mike Cuffe will be up here shortly on another issue, but he represents Lake Koocanusa House, or Senate District 1. State of Montana unfortunately has been transitioned from the treasure state to the tourist state. And as you talk about tangible ecosystems, again, recreation is very important for the people of the Flathead Valley. That includes the Flathead Lake, Hungry Horse Reservoir, and of course, our transitional boundary water, Lake Koocanusa. So it is very important for us that we make sure that we ensure or ask you to take into consideration that we, as we work with floodplain and working on mitigation, that we ensure that water levels don't drastically change up or down as what they can do not only for recreation but tangible property values. I appreciate your hard work in this issue. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Ms. Mail and members of the panel. My name is Carl Glim, Representative Carl Glim from House District 6, and I wouldn't have had to make up time if all the senators would have gotten in the van at the right time. Members, as you look at modernization of the treaty, since '64, Canada has had a right to 1.5 million acre-feet of water to be diverted at Canal Flats. And I would like to have you guys look at that because they have never actually done that version up to that full potential. And if they did, it would be significant adverse effect in the Koocanusa area. It would be 26% actually of the 5.8 million acre feet that go through Libby Dam. And the detrimental effect of that to both the ecosystem and the power generation at the dam would be devastating. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Mail, members of the panel, I am Keith Regier, State Senator from Senate District 3. It's the north part of Kalispell to Whitefish. The administration in Washington has put an emphasis on fairness. Whether it's our NATO partners paying their fair share or trade deals, negotiation results have to be fair. We ask the Columbia River Treaty be fair as well. Montana and Lincoln County have sacrificed to make the river system beneficial to all. The benefits of Libby Dam have improved the lives of many people downstream. Compensation for those benefits needs to be fair for those on both sides of the border. The annual controlled flow of 5.8 million acre-feet by Libby Dam allows for that downstream benefit of flood control, recreation, and electric generation. Those economic benefits downstream from Libby Dam need to be applied in an equitable manner, starting and beginning with Libby Dam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, panel, my name is Representative Steve Henderson, and I represent South Lincoln County, which is bordered to the north by the Kootenai River. My constituents all take in Libby, Troy, and Bull River Valley. And I support Senator Cuffe's long-term efforts as an advocate for Lincoln County, which includes my home district, as well as the state of Montana for the Columbia River Treaty. Montana gave and gave in the original negotiations. In the negotiations, renegotiations, Montana should be receiving benefits that we were denied in the original negotiations. Montana should be protected from the 1.5 million acre feet diversion capability at Canal Flats, given to British Columbia. This diversion from the Kootenai would be devastating to Montana and its economy if ever used. Montana should be compensated for lost timber mining and the loss of the many family homes, lands, and the small towns inundated by the Koocanusa Reservoir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, members of the Columbia River Treaty, members and negotiators. I'm Bruce Butch Gillespie, Senate District 9, just on the other side of the mountains from you. I'm speaking also on behalf of Senator Jeff Wellborn, Chairman of Natural Resources at the Senate, and Senator Dwayne Hankney, Chairman of Energy and Telecom. Inevitable. That is how a recent newspaper editorial described a catastrophic infestation of aquatic invasive species in Montana. But I and a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers do not believe an infestation is inevitable. By working together, our partners in neighboring states and Canada, we can stop AIS, but we do need help. Currently, Montana spends millions of dollars per year on education, water testing, inspections for the more than 100,000 boats that enter Montana's waterways. The vast majority of this money is spent in the Columbia River Basin, Flathead Lake, the Kootenai River, and the Clark Fork River. Montana protects these waterways because the economic impact of an infestation would be devastating. University of Montana estimates that mitigation costs could reach $121 million, as well as lost revenues of $112 million and up to $497 million in property value losses. But Montana does not exist in a vacuum. Our neighbors in the U.S. and Canada would also be deeply impacted by the spread of AIS. Our waterways are interconnected, and so are our economic futures. PNWER suggests including AIS funding for Montana in the modernized Columbia River Treaty. Dedicated funding to prevent an infestation in Montana and neighboring states protects the entire Columbia River Basin. By protecting Montana, we protect the Pacific Northwest. I urge you to dedicate funding from the treaty to this very worthy effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Derek Skees. It's my honor to be a representative for House District 11. I'm also a majority whip in the legislative cycle. And Dr. O is the senator over my district, so if he's the SOL, I guess I'm the legislator of the lake. Canada has reaped many benefits from this treaty over the years. And please remember, I know you called Montana the big sky state, but we were once the treasure state. Many of us here still consider ourselves the treasure state. And Canada has benefited a lot from this opportunity. They have, like you had said in your opening comments, it's been protected from flood protection by what we've done here. They have 7 generating units and 5 dams on the entire drainage coming out from beginning with us. And I just want to say that perhaps we can justify a little bit of compensation back to Montana when we consider the treasure that those families lost by us removing them from the land to create it. I grew up skiing on Lake Kootenai, and I just, it's such a benefit, what you guys are doing, and I really hope you do a great thing for Montana when you're negotiating. Thank you much.
Thanks.
Madam Chief, members of the panel, my name is Gary Weens. I'm representing Montana Electric Cooperatives Association, and our co-ops in Montana deliver power to about 40% of the state's population. The current imbalance of the Canadian entitlement, we believe, negatively affects 6.4 million Northwest electric ratepayers and 130,000 ratepayers here in the state of Montana. Under the Canadian entitlement, BPA allocates 1,300 megawatts of hydro system capacity to British Columbia when it is badly needed here in the United States. During the recent cold weather, record cold weather in Montana, market power prices spiked to $1,000 per megawatt hour. Retaining our renewable hydropower production, which is power that is charged to our BPA ratepayers at cost-based rates, for use in the United States should be a clear goal of a renegotiated Columbia River Treaty. The assumptions which created the Canadian entitlement are no longer valid in our view, and the U.S. should only share energy and capacity associated with real downstream benefits rather than committing our clean energy to Canada, only to have it resold here at a massive markup. Montana's electric cooperatives support the regional recommendation. The regional recommendation on the Columbia River Treaty, with the support and input of a diverse array of stakeholders, is a significant achievement for the region. However, this regional effort was completed, as you said, in December of 2013, and the inequities of the current treaty remain in place. We sincerely hope the U.S. negotiating team can make substantial progress on a renegotiated treaty this year. We understand the initial focus of negotiation has been on flood control, but the negotiations must also focus on correcting the imbalance of the Canadian entitlement. A modernized Columbia River Treaty should maintain flood risk management similar to the current levels, but Northwest electric ratepayers should not be expected to bear flood control protection costs. Funding for flood risk management should be consistent with national flood risk policies of federal funding through appropriations, with local beneficiaries sharing costs as appropriate. With regards to ecosystem issues, we believe these issues should be addressed in negotiations with Canada in a manner that's consistent with the regional recommendation. These negotiations should recognize the ecosystem work currently being done pursuant to other regulatory and legal commitments, and should have strict financial and operational limits that allow for a renegotiated Columbia River Treaty that results in a net increase in benefits to electric ratepayers and cooperative members that receive their power from the Bonneville Power Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ms. Smale and members of the negotiating team. My name is Paul Harrington, and I am not from Montana. I am the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Idaho Water Users Association. We're an organization of irrigation districts, canal companies, and other water delivery entities throughout Idaho. Our members stretch from the Panhandle in the north to the desert farmland of the south, and everywhere in between. The Columbia River and its tributaries, primarily the Snake River, provide life and vitality to our members. Our water users have harnessed the river for recreation, power development, flood control, irrigation, flow augmentation, and other uses. On behalf of our members, I want to thank you for your very hard work on this, and your team as well. We understand the need for discretion during the negotiations, but we appreciate the opportunities to come to these town halls and learn to receive appropriate updates on the process. I would also like to thank Montana for hosting us this evening. I haven't been to Kalispell before, and it is beautiful country. I need to come back when you do get rid of the snow. Please hurry. All right. In 2017, stakeholders throughout Idaho banded together and developed a position on issues relating to the treaty negotiations. We've shared that with most members of the negotiating team, but I want to reiterate 2 points this evening. Perhaps the biggest issue for Idaho water users is the coordinated management of the river for flood control. The assured operations of the past 60 years have provided a level of certainty in the management and use of the river. The shift called upon operations in 2024 is quite concerning to Idaho water users. We commend your efforts this far and urge you to continue working toward a future of assured operations for flood management of the river. Another overarching consideration for the negotiations is the recognition that the negotiating countries each have their own relative laws and regulations. In the Pacific Northwest, not only do we have federal laws implicating the management of the river system, there are also state laws, local regulations, congressionally approved settlement agreements, and so forth. Any negotiation or modernization of the treaty should not alter state-based water rights or laws, and should not disrupt congressional authorization of the systems throughout the river. Of particular interest, again, on this point to Idaho water users is the 2004 Snake River Water Rights Agreement, sometimes referred to as the NISPERS Agreement, which was ratified by Congress. This agreement includes several components, including a flow augmentation component that provides for the annual release of 487,000 acre-feet of Snake River water. The obligations and protections of the NISPERS Agreement should not be altered as a result of renegotiation of the treaty. Again, thank you very much to you and to your team for your hard work on this very difficult issue. I recognize you are balancing many, many issues and interests in this process, and look forward to future updates. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the compliment to us.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Neil Durham. I'm a representative from the state of Montana. Specifically, I represent House District 2, which is the Tobacco Valley, beautiful Tobacco Valley. Members of my community elected me to represent them within the state of Montana. And I see that similar comparison with you, Mrs. Smale, that you're our representative for when you go for these negotiations, that when you're negotiating with our dear neighbors to the north, that you consider Montana and U.S. interests first and beyond the Canadian interests. Additionally, I think it's important to note the perspective of time. In the 1960s, I'm told that if you wanted a good-paying job, Lincoln County was where you came for that good-paying job. Currently, within Lincoln County, the good-paying jobs are typically government jobs, and in part that's because of our loss of industry. So consider the perspective from 1960 to today. And one of the problems with jobs is taxes, and our school is suffering. We've had a school bond that's failed 3 times in the last 3 years. And although I don't think the roof is going to cave in this year, it's becoming more and more desperate. We're really hoping these funds will help us provide a school for our community. A final factor within the negotiations is the water that flows into the dam. The Libby Dam, 5.8 cubic feet, million acre feet, a measurement I'm not considered with, but that water flows into the dam and then flows out of the dam and it goes back up into Canada. One of the entitlements that I guess caused some concern is that water in and of itself, I think, is something to negotiate with. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Good evening and thank you, panel. And my name is Scott Matisse with Montanans for Multiple Use North Lincoln County chapter, also a resident of North Lincoln County. I'd like to first recognize Mike Cuffe and thank him for his tireless meetings that he's gone to and negotiations that he's done and representing us on this issue. Libby Dam doesn't just hold back water for flood mitigation downstream. We also will take on water when they have heavy snowfalls on the upper part of the Kootenai watershed, sometimes 2 to 3 feet above full pool, which also then, every time that happens, we lose a little more real estate. And not to mention the real estate that we lost when the dam was put in. We have these drawdown impacts, which we're entering that season now. So some of the biggest ones are the sandstorms that we encounter in North Lincoln County from the windstorms and all the shoreline that is available for that wind. And it makes it actually, even on the north end of the valley, the Tobacco Plains there, it makes it unhealthy to that point. But we also, the recreation opportunities are lost during that time too, or they're diminished because boat ramps are out of water, fishermen can't, they're anxious to get out there and start doing some fishing when that ice comes off, so they can't get there, or they get stuck on sandbars or gravel bars trying to get in. We also, one of the reasons why I made North Lincoln County my residence over 20 years ago was, or I chose to be living there, was because we enjoyed lower power bills, electricity costs. Loss of industry has taken that away from us, so now we're in annual increases in electricity, and it's getting out of control, the power bills and increases of it. The other 3 dams up in British Columbia, they get mitigated hundreds of millions of dollars every year for the impacts that happens to their communities. Lincoln County has gotten 0 for that. So I think it's time that Lincoln County is able to get a piece of that pie. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lead negotiators, panel members of the panel, my name is Mark Hayden. I'm the general manager of Missoula Electric Cooperative. MEC is a member-owned distribution co-op serving portions of 6 Montana counties and 1 in Idaho. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comment here tonight. And like many other co-ops represented here, MEC serves the most rural populations of our region, and access to low-cost BPA wholesale power, primarily from the Columbia River hydro system, is a major contributor to the economic well-being of the communities we serve. For decades, the Columbia River Treaty between the United States and Canada worked well to enhance flood control and power needs of both nations. However, in its regional recommendation published in late 2013, the U.S. entity emphasized the need to rebalance the sharing of power benefits, otherwise known as the Canadian entitlement, going forward. Rebalancing the Canadian entitlement should be a top priority in the coming year because of the current inequity to electricity consumers, including my members at Missoula Electric. Without modification, all preference power customers in the Northwest region are impacted, as access to valuable capacity and the associated carbon-free energy continue to flow north of the border. The regional recommendation also highlighted the importance of flood control in the arrangement with Canada and discussed ecosystem measures that might be included in future negotiations. My request is this, that provision for flood control under a renegotiated treaty should not be paid for through the power sector, and any enhancements to ecosystem measures must be viewed within the context of efforts already underway and commitments already in place. Missoula Electric Cooperative supports the regional recommendation, but with each day, month, and year that passes, the imbalance of the power benefits continue to accrue. As formal negotiations between the United States and Canada proceed, I hope that attention will now turn to the Canadian entitlement for the benefit of not just my members, but all ratepayers in the Northwest region. Thank you again for the opportunity to come.
Madam Smale and other members of the panel, my name is Larry Dolezal. I'm a former Lincoln County, Montana Commissioner, and I want to thank you all for coming here today. I'll read from the letter, I'll leave. I recognize your excellent education and service background, aptly qualifying you as Chief Negotiator for the new modernized Columbia River Treaty between the U.S. and Canada since October of 17. Upon brief review of the U.S. entity regional recommendation for the future of the Columbia River Treaty after 2024, dated December 13, 2013, as you mentioned, it should require only a minor tweak to better factor in Montana within the major categories for the 2024 modernization of the subject treaty regime, which include the first three listed priorities as hydropower generation, flood risk management, and ecosystem-based function. From my brief background review, evidently Montana was somehow not specifically included in the original 1961 treaty regime for power revenue sharing, but British Columbia was. In today's political climate, one must postulate if this may have been due to a simple oversight, or rather if someone was paid off under the table to deliberately omit Montana. What do you think of when you hear Lake Koocanusa? The Kootenai River flows from Canada into the USA, back into Canada, and eventually back into the USA as part of the Columbia River Basin. Montana has far greater impacts from the treaty projects and Lake Koocanusa than British Columbia. It only stands to reason that Montana should have equal footing with British Columbia in every aspect of the management of the Kootenai River drainage for power revenue, flood control, and ecosystem impacts. This isn't rocket science. This is basic math 101. What is good for the goose is good for the gander. There should be parity across the board for Montana with British Columbia. If there isn't parity, the new modernized 2024 treaty will be unfair and biased in favor of Canada and British Columbia. If British Columbia receives power revenue sharing concessions, so should Montana. Plain and simple. Why didn't Montana receive the same power revenue sharing concessions in the original 1961 treaty? Who was responsible for this oversight? Since Montana has been overlooked for 60 plus years by the time the new 2024 treaty will be enacted, possibly Montana should receive even more power revenue sharing than British Columbia receives for 60 plus years until Montana is made whole and catches up with BC. Also, if there are no Canadian interests in seriously pursuing Kootenai River water diversions, this stipulation should be totally removed from the language of the new modernized 2024 treaty regime. Sincerely, thank you.
Thank you.
Council, I'm not a politician, but I am the general manager for Lincoln Electric out of Eureka, Montana. And I want to say right off that we are in favor of the regional recommendation, and I want to say out loud that we are thankful for all the work that's been put into that and all the effort as well. However, with that being said, we do have a little bit different perspective. And one of those is that we have received benefits from the federal hydro system as well, which includes the Columbia River Treaty. When we look back at the last decade, the savings that my members have seen in wholesale power costs has been anywhere between $19 and $38 million. If you extrapolate that back to 40 to 45 years, the savings is roughly 50 million plus. However, there are some issues. In the last 9 years, we have seen wholesale power increases of roughly 50%. And those increases are unsustainable for my members. And in looking for ways to reduce Bonneville's costs, that's my mission. So because that's directly correlated to what my members have to pay. There's a little bit of misinformation about exactly what takes place within the treaty, I believe. One is that it is not an exchange of dollars, but it's an exchange of energy and capacity to Canada. They are able to monetize that through BC Hydro and their marketing arm, PowerX. The energy that we send to Canada is energy that we could be using to supplement the energy needed to supply and keep our prices down for my members on our side of the border and all Northwest ratepayers. Also, we have to remember that Bonneville is an at-cost provider. That means every single dime that they receive comes from ratepayers in the Northwest. It's not taxpayer money from the entire country as a whole. It is through the rates that my members have to pay and the 130,000 members of other cooperatives in western Montana. We also believe that that flood control needs to be paid for as it is done through the rest of the country, which means that it needs to be done so with taxpayer dollars and also for those that reap the benefits directly from those. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mike Wells. I come from Portland, where I'm the president of the Board of Supervisors for the Columbia Quarter districts. And we protect 27 miles of levees. And we have concern about the called upon storage. We think that's a threat to, I'll articulate three things. One is the 60,000 jobs that are within the 12,000 acres that we protect with our levees. Also, from a regional standpoint, it is a key rail connection from all through the region and from the Midwest, as well as barge connection. The rail and barge for grain moving through the region. Also, the last thing I'd highlight is the 142nd Fire Wing of the Air National Guard, which sets at Portland International Airport, and it protects the skies of Northern California up to the Canadian border, and that is something that's a regional benefit. The call upon storage is a big concern for us because of the increase of flows that could jeopardize those levees. I've read flows potentially up to 600,000 cubic feet, and that is a real threat. We see degradation of our levees at 450,000 cubic feet. Thank you.
Thanks for making the trip from Portland.
Hello, Madam Schmale and the Board of Representatives. I am also from the Portland metropolitan area. My name is Amber Ayers, and I'm a project manager with the Columbia Corridor Drainage Districts. As Mr. Wells alluded, we mustn't forget the past, especially thinking about the Vanport floods of 1948. The Portland community is working to ensure that our federally authorized levee system in the lower Columbia River remains accredited and meets federal standards. We recently partnered with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a flood damage reduction feasibility study of the Portland metropolitan levee system and are working diligently to address our vulnerabilities in our levee system. Under current conditions, our levees are vulnerable, and uncertainties with the Columbia River Treaty pose a major risk to all the hard work that is being done currently to modernize the system. Even with the current Columbia River Treaty risk objectives, our system has seen damages. In recent years, persistent high water levels have resulted in significant erosion, seepage, and sloughing. These have occurred when flows of the Dalles reached 450,000 cubic feet. Modeling projections have indicated a general trend towards earlier spring runoff and increased winter stream flow in the lower Columbia River Basin, thereby resulting in more precipitation in the winter, spring, and fall, with snow melt starting earlier and flows peaking earlier and substantially higher. This means that more winter rain on snow periods, in addition to the spring freshet, elevating the risk of future extreme flooding in the area. Moving to a called upon flood management approach is impractical for dealing with winter flood events. Unlike spring flood events, which are mainly snow melt driven and can be planned and forecasted for months in advance, winter flood events tend to occur due to intense rain events and are less predictable and more immediate. We must have some level of assured storage to protect the communities, natural areas, industries, and resources in the lower Columbia River Basin. This must be coupled with an operations plan that accounts for unpredictable, more extreme weather events and accounts for future river conditions. Downstream, we are heavily influenced by tidal fluctuations. Storm surges could have a significant effect on our tidal boundaries and upstream stage depending on peak timing. With increased river flows, less guaranteed storage in Canadian reservoirs, and changing river and weather patterns, the future level of regional flood protection is uncertain. Moving to a called upon management procedure creates unnecessary and dangerous uncertainties over Canadian storage. More information and transparency are needed to properly understand and prepare for this flood risk, especially in the event of moving to a called upon. I just want to remind you that moving to a called upon puts those downstream at risk. And I just want you to consider the communities that we serve. And I want to thank Montana for hosting this wonderful event and for having this opportunity, and just connect that we all really are interconnected to this river system that we love. Thank you.
That's an important point, and thanks for coming out.
Madam Negotiator and panel, my name is Trig Cook. I represent the Montana Grain Growers. I am the secretary and also farm and own and operate Heritage Custom Farming here in the Flathead Valley. We raise a lot of small grains, pulse crops, and oil seeds along with hay. The state of Montana is very well known throughout the world for high quality winter and spring wheat. One of the best quality that we can ask for comes from right here in our home state. You know, the biggest thing that we see is our truckers, they haul the commodity to the rail takes to a port somewhere along the lower Columbia River system. Very important for us to have that. One of the big things that the Columbia River is significant for is to transport our commodities by barge out to our country, or out of our country into another market, such as Japan. Japan buys 28% of Montana's wheat. So we would hate to lose that if we move forward, if we couldn't be able to export our commodities by water. For wheat farmers in Montana, it is very important. 95% of our Montana wheat is shipped overseas through the Columbia River Basin. 98% of the Flathead County's wheat is shipped by water. This is the most efficient and cost-prohibitive way for farmers to get our commodities to our buyers. When we look at the national picture, we know that 53% of the U.S. wheat exports are departed through the Columbia River system to feed the world last year. But all farmers will tell you that we consider ourselves to be environmentalists as well. We know that that if we aren't good stewards of the land, that the land won't take care of us. It has to be sustainable. So with that being said, we know the river isn't just for moving cargo. We know we share the rivers as well. We support a healthy river like everyone else in the region, and in the region and in this room, and we know that significant changes have been made over the years to the dams and how the river is operated to make sure fish are better supported. We know a lot of progress has also been made for the environmentalists since the treaty was first executed in 1964, as we've learned so much more about how we share the river systems with fish. Going forward, we don't want to see any extreme changes to the river that could hurt the U.S. farmer. It would cost the U.S. farmer at least 12 times more to ship or move commodities by rail or by truck than by using the river or water systems. If we're going to still be a nation that grows and makes things for export, we still need to have the water infrastructure that supports our ability to move cargo from Canada and the U.S. We're counting on the State Department to make sure that this national export gateway continues to serve farming communities all through the Pacific Northwest and Midwest, and we thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Paul Amos, I'm with the Columbia River Pilots. We move the deep draft ocean-going vessels between Astoria, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington. I'm also here with the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. Columbia River provides many benefits to both countries, and despite that, I know this is not an easy task of modernizing the treaty, but I think that your background makes you uniquely qualified to handle the task. So I appreciate and applaud your efforts so far. I know that you are familiar with my concerns, so I won't go over them again. Here, I will say that they are shared by 45 other professional ship handlers that I work with on the Columbia River. And so our interest is in seeing negotiations completed in a timely manner. And I was pleased to see you make that statement in your comments. So we appreciate what you're doing so far. Getting that done in a timely manner will provide a lot of benefits for both countries. So we appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mrs. Smell, panelists. My name is Drew Zacher. I represent the Montana Public Service Commission. The Montana Public Service Commission is an elected board of 5 commissioners from around Montana in their respective districts, and they regulate Montana's utility monopolies. Chairman Brad Johnson regrets that he could not be here today, as well as Commissioners Bob Lake and Randy Pinocci. They wanted me to let you know that they will be submitting written comments later this week, and wanted us to express our thanks to Senator Cuffe and the rest of our lawmakers here today and all the work they're doing. Thank you.
Good early evening, panel. My name is Dave Furman. I'm in the Montana House of Representatives representing Whitefish, which of course is home to Whitefish Lake, rivers, streams, drainages, all part of this scenario.
We went there last night for dinner. It's beautiful. I was so lucky to have a chance to visit.
That's great to hear. Thank you. There are a lot of great places in Montana, especially northwest Montana, to visit. But I do want to let you know that we took our last vote in the House of Representatives at 2 o'clock today, and then we scurried on to Helena. And I really want to recognize Senator Mike Cuffe. The good senator called me a few mornings ago at about 7 o'clock and said, "You're going to Kalispell." I think it's Wednesday. And you don't say no to Mike on an issue like that. He has been spearheading equity within this treaty for many, many years. And we all need to recognize his hard work and also his ability to galvanize the troops in a very short period of time. I support the treaty negotiations. I'm here in behalf of Montana, my home community in northern Flathead County, and I especially want to recognize my neighboring county, Lincoln County. Those folks have weathered some tough luck over the years. They, really anyone in the state of Montana, those hardworking folks need a break. This is where a lot of the water, the dam we're talking about. So it's very relevant and important to the good, hardworking people of Lincoln County that you renegotiate this treaty, keep in consideration the financial hardships of both Lincoln County and our state. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I look forward to getting those letters.
Madam Chief, members of the panel, I'm Randy Brodell. I'm Commissioner here in Flathead County, and my statements tonight will represent the Commission. First, thank you for recognizing how important the reassessment of this treaty is to Northwest Montana. Thanks also to Senator Cuffe, who's been a good friend and just a champion of the issue that we're talking about tonight. And also like to say thank you to our legislators. As you heard, they left this afternoon, but what you haven't heard is they're going back tonight. So they have a 200-mile drive after they leave here in some pretty brutal country with a lot of deer and elk in it. Please understand that Flathead County stands with our neighbors in Lincoln County and the Montana State Legislature requesting that this treaty be amended to address the loss of agricultural land and jobs in Lincoln County and revenue in our counties and our state. We ask that Montana be put on an even playing field with our good neighbors, the Canadians to the north, and by reassessing this treaty to compensate for the financial impact to Montanans. Thank you.
Madam Chairperson and members of the council, thanks again for hosting this town hall in Northwest Montana. We really appreciate it. I think the turnout demonstrates that. My name is Suzanne Daniel Hildner. I'm a practicing physician in Flathead Valley. I've been here a long time. I'm here representing the North Fork Preservation Association, which deals with the North Fork of the Flathead River, obviously part of the Columbia River Basin. My concern and our concern really is we've heard a lot tonight about flows and flood protection. We've heard a lot about power. We've heard a lot about renegotiating the treaty so it's more equitable for Montana, particularly our neighbors in Lincoln County. But our request to you would be that the ecosystem health be elevated to the same importance as flood control, commodity transportation, and generation of power. That going forward, if the Columbia River Basin system is not healthy ecologically, all of the other benefits from it will be diminished. We've heard about Montana being referred to as a treasure state, and a lot of that treasure is our natural beauty, our wildlife, our tourism, and if the health of the ecosystem continues to decline, those benefits will go away. And that would include invasive species, which you've already heard about. When considering the ecosystem, raising it to the importance of the other issues, we would also urge you to actively involve our indigenous neighbors and the tribes, Native Americans who lost a lot in the last treaty, and hopefully can have more input this time around. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing those views. I do appreciate a diversity of perspectives here.
Thank you, Ms. Schmill and members of the panel. I'm Jerry Bennett. I'm a Lincoln County Commissioner and former representative, and I'm really thankful I'm a commissioner and didn't have to ride with Representative Glenn in the van here. So my comments are very brief. I would just like to thank you, Jill, for the times we've had before. You know our needs and our desires, and you've led a very open process, and I'm grateful for that. And thank you for coming to Kalispell to allow us to comment. I would also like to just recognize the 50 or so plus Lincoln County residents that understand the importance of this treaty and have made their way here tonight, and I know will continue to be involved. So I'm just grateful for the time, and just know that going forward that this will be done in a just and proper manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Good evening to the panel. My name is Todd Butts. I'm a resident of North Lincoln County. The agenda said there would be questions, and nobody's asked one yet, so I thought I would break the ice on that. One of the main themes I've heard from the commenters tonight is equitable compensation for Lincoln County and Montana versus what Canada's been getting over the years for Libby Dam. Would you agree that that's been a pretty good theme for tonight?
That has been a theme.
Okay. I guess
and
my question.
Mike has he's been very vocal about that, and that's why we're here to hear those perspectives.
Okay. My question would be, I mean, this is an issue that you've been aware of for a while, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay. Has that compensation been part of your negotiations so far?
So we're not going into the details of any part of the negotiations. And it's important to have a discussion with Canada where we can have these frank and honest conversations with each other. So that's, I've come here to hear from you all and yes, answer questions, but there's only so far I can go in terms of negotiating positions and what's actually discussed.
I understand. I guess I would just say that the residents of Lincoln County would hope that you would make that part of the negotiations moving forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. And for your question.
Good evening, panel. Jim McKenna with Oregon Governor Brown's Natural Resource Office. I purposely waited till late in the evening to come up and speak because I want to show deference to the electeds of the state of Montana, the treasurer state of Montana, and the citizens of Montana to make sure that their voice got heard. I also know a couple of people popped in behind me, so I'm glad Oregon's not getting the last word. It's very critical to the state of Oregon and the governor herself that we understand the unique concerns here in the upper watershed of the Columbia system, in particular to the people of Montana, the Libby Dam issues. We're at obviously the end of the river system, the lower Columbia, and we have unique issues down there. So one of the reasons I came all the way up here for this meeting was to hear those very unique issues. I appreciate all that I've already learned tonight about the concerns about the state of Montana. For the state of Oregon, I testified last year at the town hall in Portland and follow up with a few conversations with you also. I think you're all aware of our concerns, but basically good, reliable power needs to be maintained, and that's affordable power to the citizens of Oregon. But most importantly, I appreciate the fact that the recommendations include ecosystem concerns at an equal footing with the power of flood control. That is critical to the state of Oregon, that those ecosystem concerns are raised at that level. And then you heard quite a bit from the flood control folks how important Portland is to the entire region, not just the citizens of Portland or the industry within Portland, but those grain terminals in Portland are servicing and providing export for a lot of the grain coming out of eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana, and other goods, other agricultural goods that are exported out through the Columbia system. So those operations are critical to everyone, and therefore good, strong flood management is critical to the state of Oregon. Those facilities are within the flood zone in that area. And also a concern about the shift from assured storage to call upon threatens that flood control storage concerns for the citizens of Portland. It also threatens the ecosystems because call upon storage may result in flows that are detrimental to the endangered species that occupy the river. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you for your time here tonight. I'm going to go back to Salem and float a bill that exempts our legislators from speed limits. So that sounds like a great idea.
Great. All right, so we have enough time for everyone who's in line now, but after those people speak, we'll have to wrap out the town hall because we'll be at our limit. So I look forward to hearing you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, ma'am. Evening, Madam Chair, members of the panel. My name is Sterling Reel. I'm a dentist in Libby, Montana. I think I can provide a unique perspective in that. I moved to Lincoln County in 2016 and purchased a practice there. I employ about 13 people. And I've learned firsthand the challenges of a small business in Lincoln County, and I'd like to outline a few points. One, the energy that has been mentioned earlier. The building that I lease and fund, personally, I saw the energy rates almost double at a certain time during the year, and I actually called in some HVAC, some maintenance men to see what was the problem, thinking that was my units. Only to learn at the end of it all that it was in fact the rates that were being affected. The other thing is education, opportunities, economic opportunities, and retaining and keeping good minds and education there in Lincoln County. Last year, I spent a good bit of time recruiting professionals to replace some retiring dentists that were moving out in June of last year. Talking to more than 10 up-and-coming dentists evaluating Lincoln County. Many turned away because of the lack of economic activity and opportunity there, the amenities there in the community, as they compared similar communities or larger metropolitan areas that had resources that were not restricted by the land use that we have there in Lincoln County. So some of those turning away, and then maintaining those, and then talking with other professionals in and around the communities, even outside of dentistry, I found the same challenges, both in the pharmacy industry and otherwise, that there's a higher turnover of those because it's hard to keep those people there because of the lack of that community investment. Likewise, Lincoln County does have a drug problem just like other ones there, which I think would go away if the economic activity increased in the area. So I think that's kind of a drag on the area because of what's going on there. I personally would like to see investment in a number of these areas, which I think would also improve the environment overall, including the individuals that live in the area, by lifting those young people with opportunity for education. Those that do decide to perhaps return or invest in the area, perhaps there might be a portion of economic development or help to raise the area there too, so that the investment that has been made over the past 50 years in this dam can be reinvested as a legacy toward the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee here. I'm Frank Garner from House District 7 here in Kalispell. Welcome to House District 7, and thank you for holding this hearing. And I support the resolution, the legislative resolution that has already been discussed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam Chair and members of the panel, I'm Josh Letcher. I'm a Lincoln County Commissioner. You know, I look young, but they say the first 50 years of childhood are the toughest. My family's lived near the Kootenai River for 7 generations. The building of the Libby Dam, filling of Lake Kootenai flooded my family's lands, both in the United States and Canada. When the Libby Dam project started, my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were made promises of a robust tourist economy and cheap electricity. But because over half of the user facilities, such as boat ramps and accesses, were never constructed on Lake Kootenai, our tourism is lacking and our electricity rates are even with other areas of the country. Lincoln County is approximately 78% federally managed lands. Approximately 34,000 acres of taxable land is flooded behind the Libby Dam. The property tax revenue, timber, and wildlife habitat are lost for forever. The property tax and timber revenues were vital to Lincoln County's ability to provide services and road maintenance for its citizens. In the late winter and early spring, when the water is drawn down for flood control, our communities suffer from major dust storms. We provide flood control to downstream communities, but our communities are still underwater. A couple of key points I have is please eliminate the option to divert the water from the Kootenai River into Columbia Lake at Canal Flats in British Columbia. Also, Canada was paid decades in advance for water storage and flood control. Please compensate Lincoln County for its water storage and flood control moving forward. I have several dozen letters here, all mostly from people that were unable to attend. They all support Senator Mike Cuffe's longstanding efforts as an advocate for the state of Montana and Lincoln County. Thank you.
Thanks, and you can hand those to Michael. She'll make sure that we have them.
Well, thank you, panel, for coming all the way out here from DC, and thank Mike Cuffe. I'm Jim Finley. I'm a resident of Eureka, and I grew up in the Evergreen area of Kalispell. I hadn't really planned on speaking tonight, but one of the things that is kind of a concern of mine is this Canal Flats diversion. Because I'm not against the coal mining in British Columbia, but there is a selenium issue that's coming down the river. And if you start taking water away that's coming into it, you're going to increase the concentrations of selenium, and the more you increase that selenium, the more the effect is going to be felt downstream. And so that's kind of the, point that I wanted to make, so thank you.
Thank you, and that's something that we're tracking at the State Department. One of my colleagues is here, Julian Kachinoff, and he's working with EPA, and they have a binational dialogue set up with Canada to talk about the selenium issue, but I take your point, it is separate from the diversion, but impacted by the diversion.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman, members, my name's Don Truman. I grew up within Lake Kootenoosa alongside it. I spent my entire life there. And I'm asking for equity in the new treaty. There's folks downstream that occasionally don't flood. We were flooded out full time in order to grant them that. The reservoir has not only affected us and the land that we lost within the waters, but it contributed to the endangered species, the bull trout, the sturgeon, and the grizzly bear were all affected by it, but all of our lands that lie above the reservoir were then curtailed in our ability to use those lands. And on this next go around, I would like to see equity. Not only did we sacrifice more than the downstream users do for the power benefits, but we also we sacrificed more than Canada did too. Because in 2012, they raised the water again on us to a higher level, so they would not flood in Kootenai Lakes in Canada. And in all this time, we have got no compensation for any of that, and nor has Montana. And I would like the new treaty to be more fair. If you go back and look at our economic status since the reservoir, we've been on a steady decline economically in Lincoln County. Same as the species, you can trace almost all of that back to that lake and the ill effects it had on the county. And part of those ill effects were the fact that all that was promised, I mean, we delivered the water storage and all that, but there was lots promised for amenities that was to go along with that lake. I live on the West Kootenai, which is a community that was isolated by the lake. We have a 20-some 6-mile commute to town when we only had a few. We were cut off from our ability to farm and ranch and do timber activities on both sides of the river when I was a kid, and those have had a tremendous economic impact on us. The closer you get to that lake, the less the people that were there when I was a kid are all gone. It's had a tremendous, you can go to anywhere in Lincoln County and you'll find people that were there in 1960 and 1970 are still within the communities. But the closer you get to that reservoir, those people are gone, and it's economics that drove that. So as Canada has been reimbursed for a lot of their storage, I would like to also see Montana and Lincoln County reimbursed for those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the panel. My name is John Fuller, and I'm a member of the House of Representatives for House District 8, which begins just south of here and proceeds to West Kalispell. In my previous lifetime, I was the Northwest Field Director for then Congressman Ryan Zinke, who then became Secretary of the Interior, and I just talked to him on the phone today. A little bit of my thunder of what I was going to communicate to you today was stolen in the issue of the heavy metals and selenium, and a reminder that as the levels of the lake rise and fall, particularly then the levels of the selenium or the heavy metals can change dramatically, especially if there's a low water in the lake, as you well know. I would like to again thank you for all your hard work, and as we do this constantly, thank you for your efforts at taking all of our comments. And kudos again to Senator Cuffe, who has worked tirelessly for Northwest Montana on this. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Bill Yelling from Lakeside. I'm just a peon here in Flathead County. So, since I'm neither personable enough nor well-spoken enough to hide my language and bureaucraties, I think I'll be just very blunt and straightforward and probably be a fly in the ointment.
from my perspective, and I've talked about this with some people who are fairly knowledgeable about it, I think one of the emphases needs to be on reducing, if possible, electrical rates being paid to people in the Northwest as a result of this treaty. And I'm speaking especially in regard to the Canadian entitlement, whether it's actually cash transferred or power transferred and then sold back to the United States at a profit. So if that's possible to see rate decreases as a result of change in that entitlement process, that would be something I'd be in favor of. The other thing is, I know that this treaty has added, and I'd perhaps like to hear some comment on it, I believe that the treaty has added ecological well-being, so to speak, for the river system as a leg to this particular treaty, and that was not, I don't think, specifically included in the previous treaty. I could be wrong about that, but at any rate, I believe that's certainly included in the treaty. I'd like to see that not be strictly salmon related. I know how much the power companies already pay and the ratepayers already pay for salmon mitigation in this area. It's somewhere between 30 and 42%, I believe, depending on who you talk to and where they live. But I have no objection to seeing salmon floating in the river. That's certainly desirable. But if it's going to result in another increase in rate paying as a result of that, I'd like to see that being considered. I appreciate being a lifelong educator. I appreciate the fact that you folks have to negotiate with people with very diverse opinions, including mine. And I'd like to thank you for your efforts.
Thanks for sharing that opinion. Appreciate it.
My name is McGregor Rhodes. I was the secretary of the Libby, Montana Rod and Gun Club for 10 years. In 1978, our club filed a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to stop phase 2 of the Libby Dam. That included the additional generator units and the construction of a re-regulation dam below Libby Dam. After a 10-year epic legal and political struggle, we won. There's no dam, there's no re-reg dam, there's only one additional unit in Libby Dam. My club went on then to fight the hydroelectric dam on the Kootenai Falls, and that was another huge epic proportion project that we fought, and we were successful. Those were stupid projects, but there was an economic aspect to all those. And we would always bring up the fact that if the diversion was allowed, that the kilowatt hours from all the dams on the Kootenai River, the Lee Dam, and any other dams would be reduced. That was a big selling point we had to gain opposition to the dams. Let's see, Libby suffered, people suffered. The dam was a bad idea. The reason we were successful to stop the re-reg dam and additional units was the community of Libby was behind us. They were sick of the Corps and the lies. And I don't care who you were, Dem, Republican, whatever. They didn't like the Corps because they lied. We were sick of it. Anyway, epic battle. The GAO was brought into it. They audited the Libby Dam Phase 2, and it was the worst cost to benefit ratio ever discovered by the General Accounting Office. In our lawsuit, we got the BPA to admit that it's cheaper to conserve energy than it is to produce energy. We got the powers that be to admit that the load forecasting for the new power units all over the Northwest was lies. They didn't need that much energy. And our lawsuit went on, I believe, to pave the way for the Pacific Northwest Power Planning Commission and other entities. They saw the Northwest was in chaos, and they had to do something. And I will say this, that I reject the fact that hydropower is renewable energy, and all I know about is Libby. We lost 90 miles of river, 40,000 acres of land are gone, all those farms, ranches, logging, gone. There was the only native herd of bighorn sheep in western Montana. It was called the Ural Tweed herd. They're basically gone behind the dam. Those sturgeon are gone. The Dolly Farm are gone. So I reject that notion. I think it's terribly destructive to the earth itself. I don't know what more to say. Our lawsuit was epic. We had a great lawyer, James Getz from Bozeman, Montana. Jim worked his legal miracles. We went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and won. The court wanted to take us to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court wouldn't listen to our case. And all I can say is the court lied. And the land suffered and the people suffered. And we should do something to make it better.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing those feelings and thoughts with us. We appreciate it. And Mike, yes, go ahead. You've been ever present in this town hall, so you should say something. But then we are going to have to wrap it up because there are 3 minutes like everybody else, and we do need to wrap it up. As your colleagues have said, a lot of people drove and flew a long way, so we do need to wrap it up. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, my 3 minutes start now. Okay, thank you. And the first thing I'm doing, and I have to hand these out personally.
Better talk while you're handing them out, Mike.
These are the official resolution passed by the Montana Senate, my bill, or my resolution. Passed 50-0 in the Senate. Out of 100 members of the House, there was 1 no vote. And I think that was a little reaction to a vote I had made the day before. But at any rate, Jill, thank you so much. Karen, Michael, David, and Lori. You don't know how much this means. We have felt disrespected, left out of the process, ignored. And I'm not going to recount the other things. You have listened to me, you've read my I've got a few notes that I made that I want to follow up with you. But what I'd really like to do right now, you heard some of the folks who talked about their lives on the river. Now those were younger folks. I grew up there. I played in the river, worked along the river. I was editor of the newspaper. I interviewed the people, and Jill has a copy of the recording, now made a video. And it's heart-jerking. Where's Johnny Doble and Mr. Hudson? Come on, stand up. Now I don't know, there may be others here, and feel free, but Mr. Hudson graduated in 1949. He grew up down on Island in the old Kootenai River. Johnny Doble, along the river, they know what was there. They lived there, they made their living there. Their parents and grandparents made their living there. And it was taken away from them. Passions run deep. Now, the other thing I'd like to do, would everybody from Libby raise their hands? Libby, Troy? Now, would everybody from Eureka raise their hands? So we have a meeting here in Kalispell where you can see who came. We'd love to have you in Lincoln County. We'd show you a good time there.
As I mentioned, I made a brief visit to Libby, but hopefully one day I'll be able to spend a little more time there.
And I want to tell the people, Jill, that you've listened to me. This group has heard me before, this panel. I'm not gonna go into other details on it. You've read them in the paper, we've discussed them in meetings. Thank you all for coming. I can't tell you how deep it touches me. The same to my colleagues who made the trip from the House and the Senate. And I also want to say this is a very unusual thing. I asked the Senate President and the Speaker of the House if somehow I could get up to this meeting. The next thing I knew, it wasn't just me coming. We had a bunch of them. And means a lot. Hey, the driving was okay, Carl. And you want to know what else? He got us here in time that we could go to the bathroom before we came in. But It was a good job driving. We had a highway patrolman looking over his shoulder all the way. So anyway, I'm going to set this down now. And I didn't expect to get teary here, but I have a few times. I did during the testimony. I do when I look at you guys. I did when I walked in and I began seeing. I told them that I represent a lot of people, and a lot of people who care a lot. I didn't know we'd get this many to come this far and spend this time. Thank you so much. And I didn't realize my colleagues would step up the way they have. And the things that were said about me, I appreciate. You guys all work. We all work on different things. It's a long-time passion of mine, and it felt so much, so good that you guys took the time and you held a meeting up here. And I know there was some talk about holding the meeting in Missoula. And I know I asked to have it in Lincoln County. But this means a lot. You came to Montana and you got as close to Lincoln County as you could, especially with the air flights and everything. So thanks a bunch. You will be getting additional comments from me. The reason I gave those out specifically, if you notice, those are resolutions signed by the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and on the back is Secretary of State. Normally those go out by registered mail, and that's why I told them I would get them directly to you if they would get copies, and they hustled the process out to get them done for this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing. All right, well, I just want to say, give my thanks to everybody who came up to the mic and spoke a lot. It really takes a lot of courage and effort to articulate your feelings and concerns. And again, I appreciate the diversity of views that was expressed and various points. And I'm thinking about all of you tonight as you make your way home. I hope that you stay safe out on those Montana roads, and those of you traveling to Idaho or Washington State, please, everyone be safe. And thank you for spending this evening with us. It means a lot to us.